Hello, welcome and salutations to Den of Otaku, Den of Geek's official anime discussion series where we break down all things anime, Japanese pop culture, and just basically all the biggest developments going on in the industry. And I am your host, Daniel Kurland, and let me say, we're doing something very special for the spooky season. We're talking horror, anime, everything horror's got to do with anime. We're getting into it in this episode. We're basically just going to break down anime's curious relationship with the horror genre and why this is a medium that's really embraced horror for nearly 50 years now. So let's get into it, guys. Otaku beware, you're in for a scare. Big fan of anime, but I'm also very passionate about horror, and I think it's very cool that anime is really a medium that celebrates horror in a way that you don't always see in like American Western animation. When you look at American animation, for example, you see some shows that are technically horror shows like Lucy, Daughter of the Devil, or Ugly Americans, or Mr. Pickles. These are shows, though, that are basically comedies with horror thrown into them. They do have some disturbing horror stuff going on, but they're primarily interested in making you laugh. And I mean, even some of the creepier animated shows that are out there, like Shivering Truth, or even something like Primal, Todd McFarlane's Spawn, these are still shows that aren't primarily horror series at the end of the day. And you also see like a lot of Western animation that's horror, but like is geared towards younger audiences, so it doesn't exactly have a lot of bite. Stuff like Tales from the Crypt Keeper, The Simpsons, like Treehouse of Horror installments, Gravity Falls. Basically, all of these are fun and they're like enjoyable for horror fans. But if you want to truly get scared and like feel that terror that comes with the horror genre, these aren't going to do it for you. And it's interesting to see that anime is a medium that will go all out with horror and really gives it a place where it can thrive. And it's not just in horror in a broad sense, but there's like a lot of different subgenres that anime likes to celebrate, whether that's psychological horror, body horror, supernatural, sci-fi horror. These all have a place in anime, and I thought it would be fun to kind of just run through them all, highlight some of the bigger titles, why these shows are doing things differently, and why it's exciting to celebrate these, especially on the Halloween season. We love it. So to kind of just take a step back, horror became really big for anime in the 80s, but some of the earliest examples of it that kind of blazed trails in terms of horror anime were 1972's Devilman by Go Nagai and 1973's Belladonna of Sadness. And Go Nagai's Devilman is an interesting example because Devilman's become a big franchise. It's about a character who kind of becomes the titular Devilman, who then uses his like devil power to fight other demons in the world. And it's a shonen show, but it has a darker slant to it. And I think it was really important for audiences to see a shonen show this early in their run that embraces horror and shows that it's a cool medium to play around in. And Devilman has become a huge franchise. They're still doing stuff with Devilman. So I think it's pretty significant that this horror franchise did connect with people and not just succeed, but has spawned off so many other variations on itself. And Belladonna of Sadness is a much more interesting example. It was directed by Aichi Yamamoto, and it's kind of revered as a horror anime classic 50 years after its release. But when it came out, it was met with disappointment. It wasn't a financial success. It even bankrupted the studio that made it. But it's taking a very different approach to horror. It's actually based on a nonfiction novel, Jules Michelet's Le Sorcière. It's about a kind of female peasant who on the night of her wedding gets sexually assaulted, and in order to get revenge, she makes a deal with the devil to kind of become this vengeful, omnipotent horror creature. And so there's a lot of like Leda and the Swan going on there, some Joan of Arc going on there too. It's interesting to see that like Belladonna of Sadness gets into some really heavy subject matter. It was kind of praised for its psychedelic colors. It really is animated in a way that's unlike anything else. Despite the fact that it's 50 years old at this point, it really is beautiful. It holds its own with any modern anime series, and it just gets into some really dark material. There's stuff of like misogyny, witch burning, just dark ideas that were really brave for anime movie, horror or otherwise, to tackle in the early 70s. And despite how Belladonna of Sadness wasn't a success upon its release, it kind of opened doors for other storytellers to show that you can tell these type of stories, that you can indulge in darker material, and that anime is an exciting place to kind of indulge in more heightened visuals and dark ideas. And so, to go off of that, we talked a little about horror animation for younger audiences in terms of Western creations, but anime really plays with that too with its horror shonen series. Shonen are anime or manga that are typically geared towards younger male viewers, and it's interesting that shonen has really become a place that embraces horror too. There's still shonen series, there's still action series, but a lot of these titles will go all out with horror. So Hell Teacher Nube is one example. This is a story about a teacher who has like a demonic hand who works at an elementary school. And he's kind of prone to detecting supernatural creatures, most of which are haunting the students at his school. So he goes about his days helping these students out, exorcising demons, and it finds like a really successful formula in that format. Gigigi no Kitaro is another example that's kind of just like a more conventional yokai hunting series. Each episode kind of breaks down a different demon or yokai, does something different with those. There's a lot of modern shonen horror like Kaiju number 8, which is like a guy who turns into a kaiju. There's new Devilman stuff out there. Dan to Dan is another. And to just look at the most successful examples of this, there is a trilogy, or a trio rather, of shonen series known as the Dark Trio. This was Chainsaw Man, Jujutsu Kaisen, and Hell's Paradise, that were just 3 extremely popular manga series that all were kind of more mature than the standard shonen series. I think it's kind of significant that horror could have such a place in shonen that it spawned this trio of shows that even had their own name, and that horror isn't just accepted in the shonen genre, but that it can kind of make waves and be some of the most popular series in the genre. The fact that the Dark Trio kind of made waves and was as popular as it is, I think kind of just shows the changing trends in shonen, and that this is a genre that's more willing to embrace mature content, that they want to get more and more into horror, and that horror is something that doesn't just get accepted in shonen, but that it can thrive in that medium. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot more shonen series that are horror-centric, that are a little more mature than what shonen would have been doing a decade or two ago. And it's just exciting to kind of get that blend, that there are mainstream horror series that are being put on the cover of Weekly Shonen Jump, and just other exciting developments there. And I mean, even just to go one step further in that department, there are a lot of anime that aren't explicitly horror anime, but they still like to embrace horror through like Halloween episodes, like shows like Sailor Moon, Digimon, Pokemon, Detective Conan. They all have really upsetting and disturbing Halloween episodes. And I mean, that's not unique to anime. There are plenty of American animation shows that have these, but anime really goes one step further in that department, I think. And it is willing to kind of push boundaries and tell a story that's a little darker than usual. And it's cool to just see the shonen genre embrace that. Psychological horror anime are also extremely popular. There are shows like Monster is one of the bigger ones. Monster is about a neurosurgeon who saves the life of a serial killer, because, I mean, that's his duty as a doctor, but then the serial killer starts killing more people, and this doctor kind of feels responsible for these deaths because he helped this killer come back to life. It's this really tight cat and mouse story that's really upsetting, but really just gets into the psychology of horror. Another and Shiki are two other anime series that play with more common tropes. Shiki is about vampires, another is about ghosts, and it really taps into that like small town Salem's Lot mentality where they take these more popular ideas but do something really different with them and show how anime can recontextualize these tropes in big ways. Wonder Egg Priority is another really gripping psychological horror anime that's technically like a magical girl show, but the monsters that are being fought are like manifestations of these girls' inner trauma and just like suicidal ideation. It's really dark stuff, but uses magical girl storytelling to kind of do something different with it. To go one step further, psychological horror has like a whole subgenre of death game series. Death game, if you think of something like Squid Game is one of the more popular examples of this, but death game shows have become really popular in anime, and it's an interesting subversion there. Like, these are all shows that turn life or death games into a form of entertainment. They're series where characters either have to engage in games to stay alive or kill other people to stay alive, and anime is just ripe with this, whether it's horror or otherwise. There are shows like Dead Man Wonderland, Future Diary, Gantz, Talentless Nana. Danganronpa is a really successful one that started as a video game series. Alice in Borderland is another, and I think it's important to kind of just take note of these shows, that anime can be a medium where the idea of these death game shows are not just popular, but like there's more and more of them all the time. Death game has really taken off as a type of storytelling, and I think that shows how horror can really succeed in anime, especially when it comes to psychological horror. And just another type of psychological horror anime that are out there are these kind of like trick anime. There are shows that might seem very friendly, very innocuous, usually with their voice acting or their visuals. They seem like very friendly shows, but when you actually get into it, they're really dark, really disturbing, sometimes more than regular shows that bill themselves as horror series. And I think this is a really effective way to get under the audience's skin and almost trick them into thinking they're going to have a lighthearted adventure and then pull the rug out from under them and really disturb them in ways that can only be done in animation in some cases. Made in Abyss is a good example of this. This is like, it dresses itself up as this friendly adventure series where this girl adventurer descends down this big hole, but each level of the abyss is more intense. There's a curse that's put on her where she can't go back up the abyss, so once you go in, you have to keep going further, and it just becomes emotionally taxing. There's such palpable dread in this show, and it really hits hard in a way that like a lot of live action horror struggles to do. Happy Sugar Life is another good example of this, where it's a show about a like older teen who kidnaps this younger girl who views her as just this kind of like beacon of purity, that this girl is so pure and happy and chaste that like she just wants to preserve this, and she's so willing to do this that she kills people that live in their apartment building, anyone who gets on her sense. So it like presents itself as this really endearing story of love and understanding and protection, but in the end, the person who's looking after this girl is incredibly deranged and like the worst person that she should be with. Higurashi, When They Cry, is another good example of this too. Higurashi is a really fascinating franchise, and it first started as like a murder mystery visual novel video game series that was put out by Seventh Expansion, written by Ryukishi 7. What's interesting about this series is it's set in this kind of sleepy town called Hinamizawa. It focuses on a bunch of friends, and then suddenly this like illness breaks out that causes people to have murderous tendencies and start killing each other. Higurashi, though, what it does so differently is it's been going for about 2 decades now. It keeps putting out new series, and between these many different series, there's about 100 episodes between it. And it's such an interesting way to tell a story and approach a franchise. These new Higurashi anime aren't just direct sequels, they're not just spin-offs. What they do is they really plays with its universe and gets into non-linear storytelling. As Higurashi goes on, like there's one of the series that really gets into like a depressing time loop narrative that's very Edge of Tomorrow in its construction, and really just hammers in the idea that regardless of what you do, you're going to end up dead, that you can outsmart the universe, and that the universe is almost designed to kill you at the end of the day. There are like witches and these kind of omnipotent beings that exist in Higurashi that get more expansion in different series. And it really just like took me by surprise that this kind of starts out as like a relatively simple show, but the more that you see of it, it becomes this really twisted mystery where you're not sure of everything that's going on, and it's just such an interesting way to tell a story. And it has like a very friendly character design where these look like happy kids. You think you're getting like a really cute slice of life show, and then the murders kick in, and you're really just like, oh my god, this is really intense. And Higurashi, it's doing something very unique, but it also is very in touch with this other series, Monogatari, which is also a really interesting way to approach franchises and non-linear storytelling. Monogatari focuses on a character named Kayomi, who is a third-year high schooler who survives a vampire attack and then kind of starts protecting other women who have become victim to supernatural attacks, whether that's other vampires, whether that's spirits, ghosts, demons. All of this stuff gets tackled in Monogatari, and it's another show that's been around for about 15 years as a franchise. It keeps tackling different corners of itself, though, in a very non-linear sense. And it's kind of like if Friday the 13th, rather than just putting out new sequels, if it was like, okay, this one Friday the 13th film is focused on Jason, this film is focused on the counselors, this is focused on the kids that go to the camp, this movie's focused on Camp Crystal Lake and the people that put the camp together. It really just breaks down different corners of the franchise in a way that really makes you think about storytelling, why you're getting told the stories that you are, and it's such an unusual approach to a franchise that I love it so much. Monogatari does a really good job of, if you've watched each series in the franchise, they all do connect together and give you a really strong sense of connective tissue, but at the same time, it succeeds in this episodic sense that you can watch each of these franchises and they still succeed on their own. You don't feel like you've only had a piece of a greater whole. Really just does incredible work. They're still putting out new Monogatari series, and it's beautifully animated. It really gets into like stream of consciousness storytelling, existential ideas in a really exciting way, and I just love this series to death. And despite of how it is a horror series, it's so much more than that too, and it really can open your mind on the different ways to tell a story, and that it doesn't just need to be A to B to C with how you approach something. Body horror is also really popular in anime. There's a really interesting trend in both shonen and seinen series to have these stories where humans get turned into monsters and then have to fight similar monsters. It's a really great way to grapple with humanity, if we are the people we think we are, and if just because we've become a monster means that we're no longer the person that we used to think we were. Tokyo Ghoul is a great example of this. Kaiju number 8 is another one. Attack on Titan even fits this mold too. Parasite the Maxim, I think, is a really great example. It deals with an alien invasion where these aliens come down to Earth, they start possessing people and trying to do like an invasion of the body snatchers, indoctrination. Focuses on a teenager, Shinichi, whose hand becomes possessed by an alien, and he kind of forms this relationship with the alien in his hand as they try to stop this alien invasion. And it gets into the same idea of just losing yourself. Are you an alien? Are you a human? And it's just a great way to tackle all this. Blood Sea, another great body horror anime. And when you're talking about body horror, I think it's important to touch on Junji Ito. He's someone who has really become a mainstream name. He admittedly comes out of manga, but he just does really incredible artwork, really upsetting visuals that almost make you feel like you're haunted after you read them. I mean, we got some Junji Ito going on right here. He does such incredible work with telling stories that might almost seem boring or innocuous, but then they really kind of start tugging at threads that show you the horror that hides beneath society. As much as he does body horror, he really gets into cosmic horror too. There's been a few anime adaptations of Junji Ito's work. Most of the time they're anthologies because he just has such a prolific library of material to pull from. These aren't bad anime, but I feel like they really do struggle to kind of nail what makes Junji Ito so popular in the first place. Junji Ito Maniac is one of the more recent ones, and it's fine, but it is kind of losing that magic that is in the manga. However, Adult Swim is putting out a 4-episode adaptation of Uzumaki, which is one of his bigger works. It's about like a town and community of people who are kind of transfixed by spirals. Spirals take over everything in a very alien sense, and it's just a beautiful way to look at loss of sanity and just feeling like there's bigger forces that have gotten out of control and that you don't have a say in who you are or what's going on anymore. People are becoming spirals. Spirals are taking over the town. It's really gripping stuff, and this anime adaptation truly feels like a Junji Ito manga come to life. They've finally nailed the formula. They've been working on this anime for like 5 years, so it is a real labor of love and a testament to how craft can come through when you're putting in the work and understanding it, not just trying to cash in on a brand name. And Uzumaki hopefully will be a success, and it can prompt other mini-series adaptations of Junji Ito's work. There's so much to explore there, and he is just such an incredible storyteller that I do feel is like synonymous with anime and manga body horror, that we need to get more of this out there. He's doing a great job, and Uzumaki will hopefully start a new trend in that department. Outside of body horror, there is like a lot of anime horror that deals with supernatural ideas, deals with science fiction. Blue Gender is a great example of this. It's like a alien invasion story too, but like a character goes into cryo sleep, wakes up, and then suddenly the world is taken over by aliens and he has to fight back, rebel against this stuff. Elfen Lied is another great example. Truly one of like the most depressing anime I've seen, that has like an amnesiac alien that's taken under some two kind, caring people's wing, but suddenly darker forces want to take this alien, awaken her psychic powers, and just use her as a weapon. It gets into some really like touching commentary on if humanity is like inherently corrupt, if we just turn things into weapons, and just like the darkness that lies in all of us, and if humans are even worse than these creatures in the end because of our propensity to use things and turn them into weapons in the end. Hellsing is another, like, it's a vampire anime, it's an action anime, but it does really get into like sci-fi, supernatural tendencies. There's just a lot to unpack there, and it is material that really works well when you look at the broader scope of what horror anime has to offer. Anthology horror anime is another really popular territory. Horror and anthology series just work well together. You see this a lot in live action material like Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Dark Side, Black Mirror. There's a lot of movies too that are just anthology horror films, the VHS series. It's easy to kind of just tell episodic, short horror stories in this sense, but there's so much of this going on in anime that's worth taking a look at. Yami Shibe Japanese Ghost Stories is one of the more popular ones. I admittedly think that this show's a little flawed, but I do respect that it's been going on for like 12 seasons now. It's a really lo-fi anime production. Like the episodes are only like 4 minutes long and really minimalist animation. Like sometimes it's just like a still drawing that they're just kind of shaking on the screen. So it's pretty small budget, but the fact that it has been going on for over a decade and become this institution, again, I think speaks to anime's interest in horror and how we always want to cling on to it, that we don't want horror to leave the genre, and that it's something that we continually return to. Some of the other better anthology horror anime that are out there are things like Pet Shop of Horrors. Laughing Salesman is a really interesting example that kind of like exhibits this monkey's paw storytelling. It doesn't necessarily set itself up to be a horror show. It's about this like cryptic laughing salesman who sees people who have problems in their lives, whether it's They're unhappy at work, unhappy in their marriage. They just don't know how to have fun. He offers them a proposition to say, I can help fix your life. I can put a smile on your face as long as you do these things and don't break this one rule. These people always break the rule. Laughing Salesman always ends in like a bleak, dark ending that really, like, some of these episodes are really upsetting. But despite how you know that these people are going to screw things up in the end, it's still really engaging. It just has a formula that works for it. And it, again, like, really gets darker than most traditional horror series, even though it's kind of towing the line with a lot of that material. Death Parade is another interesting one too that focuses, it's set in like a purgatory-like realm where when two people die at the same time, they get sent to this purgatory and have to play innocuous recreational games like billiards or air hockey or darts. The loser of this game gets like their soul damned, and the winner kind of gets a better possible life in the future. What's interesting about this show is like it really just becomes an excuse to get into these characters. As they're playing these games, they talk about their backstory, their lives, what led to their deaths, and it really becomes this like engrossing character study at the end of the day. I think what separates Japanese anime horror anthologies from other horror anthologies is that it is so character driven. These are anthology series that do have some really dark ideas. They do really push into horror. But at the end of the day, it's really like an excuse to better understand these characters. It's opportunities to really get in these people's heads. And despite the dark material that goes on, it really brings it all back to the individuals at the end. It's not just trying to spook you. It's not just trying to show you something alarming. It really is interested in the people. And I think this is something that kind of gets overlooked in American horror. There are plenty of American horror stories that are interested in character development and backstory, but there can be a tendency to just celebrate death, celebrate monsters that don't have a core beneath them all. And anime horror, I think, is very careful about having substance beneath it all and in telling a story that amounts to more than just a horror story, that there's a emotional core to it, which is so important for horror to succeed. Kind of the last thing I want to highlight is not a specific genre, but I do think it's a trend that's worth taking a look at. In the 1980s, there was really this big push of erotic horror, stuff like Wicked City, Demon City Shinjuku, Violence Jack. These are all series that were direct-to-video movies or OVAs that kind of skirt the line with hentai, but aren't hentai, but just are really interesting, mature horror stories that do dabble in eroticism. But I think what's interesting is these are titles that there was a demand for in the 80s. People wanted to see them, and the fact that they were direct-to-video shows that this was something that people were willing to pay for, that it wasn't something that was just on television or in movie theaters. There was a direct demand for it that led to these direct-to-video productions. And these, curiously, were series that found their way into American video stores too. Like, I remember going to video stores in the 80s and 90s, and you would see things like Wicked City on the shelf. It would be a very obscure title, but the fact that these anime kind of did escape from Japan, did have dubs, and did kind of connect on a mainstream level, even though a lot of these series, there's something called Yuritsuki Doji, which is like truly messed up stuff, and that I would say perhaps does qualify as hentai, but like, these are titles that kind of proliferated like the whole like tentacle porn stereotype, and just that anime is kind of empty in that sense. These films do bring a lot more to the table than that, but they are responsible for kind of kickstarting these tropes, these stereotypes, and some of the more hollow presumptions that accompany anime that I think we've grown out of, but were very prevalent during the 80s. And I think it's interesting that the 80s were when these titles kicked off. 80s was a big time for horror in general. I mean, you look at American horror in the 80s, there was a proliferation of slasher titles, monster movies, and the fact that this was also going on in Japan at the time, but in the form of these erotic horror direct-to-video releases is very interesting, and it is a turning point for the industry. I think the fact that these direct-to-video titles could succeed showed people just the value in horror, and they weren't just cheap productions. Like, there's some beautiful animation that comes out of these despite the very mature subject matter at the core of it. I mean, like Yoshiaki Kawajiri, who did Ninja Scroll, he came out of these titles. He was responsible for Wicked City. So there is a real talent and caliber behind it, and that it's not just an excuse to titillate at the end of the day. There is some real substance there, even though it is a medium that's kind of at war itself at the end of the day. We're gonna do our standard release the Hounds. We're gonna do the big three here, but we're gonna specifically kind of focus on horror aspects of it. So if you hear that, it's not release the Hounds we're hearing this time around. It's release the Hellhounds, everyone. Ow! Okay, everybody, release the Hellhounds. Yep, we're doing our standard physical media segment here. Physical media often slips through the cracks. It's something that doesn't get enough love, but there's a lot of collectors out there, and anime really knows how to give physical media its due. And so we just wanted to highlight 3, not just physical media releases, but also all of these are horror releases too. So if you're looking for some good content to have playing at your Halloween party or just a spooky season in general, these are some titles you should put on your radar. So the first of these is Zom 100, Bucket List of the Dead, the complete first season. This show came out last year. It was really exciting. It faced a lot of production issues that slowed down the releases, so that none of that's an issue when you just have the Blu-ray. You can watch it, you can binge it all in succession. Zombie stuff doesn't always get me excited. Honestly, I feel like I'm kind of lukewarm to zombie material, that it's rare for those type of stories to get my attention, but Zom 100 really opened my eyes. It kind of gets to like Shaun of the Dead territory in the sense that you focus this character who has like a really boring job and is just listless in his existence. Suddenly though, a zombie apocalypse takes place and now he's reinvigorated. He doesn't have to go to work anymore, and he finally has all the time to do all the things that he wanted to do in life but just couldn't because of the responsibilities bearing down on him. So he's never been happier. He's like being his best self despite how there is like constant death around him and he's stuck in a zombie apocalypse. It's a really fun subversion of the standard zombie tropes. At the same time, it is like doing a lot of the conventional zombie trope stuff, like you meet a bunch of survivors and get their backstories. But it's a really fun show. It's doing different stuff. It has this really creative idea where like blood is rainbow colored in it, which is just like a fun way to get like wild and ridiculous with violence, but in a way that's still kind of sanitized. This show was huge as a manga. Hopefully they'll continue to make more seasons of it though, but just Zom 100, Bucket List of the Dead.
I'd forgotten the world was so beautiful, full of so many beautiful colors. Who cares if there's zombies chasing me? I'm just happy to have a day off from work!
Next is Yu Yu Hakusho, seasons 1 and 2, and seasons 3 and 4. These are 2 separate packs that I believe are Walmart exclusives, but a great way to kind of get caught up on Yu Yu Hakusho. This is a shonen series that was kind of, I think a lot of people regard it as one of the biggest shonen to come out of the 90s. It's a great shonen series. It's 100 and some odd episodes. It's not like a ton of episodes, so it's not something where you're kind of hopelessly lost watching it in the same way that Dragon Ball or Naruto or One Piece is. There's like a really digestible amount of this. Yu Yu Hakusho, some people don't necessarily think of it as horror, but it really gets into the demon aspect in a creative way. It focuses on a juvenile delinquent, Yusuke Urameshi, who dies and becomes a spirit detective and then kind of uses his newfound purpose to fight demons, monsters. He has human friends, he has demon friends. They just do a great job of like fulfilling those shonen action tropes, but also really exploring some really macabre ideas too. It really finds its footing during the Dark Tournament saga. A lot of shonen series will have like a tournament arc to kind of focus on action and just introduce a lot of creative characters. Yu Yu Hakusho is one of the better examples of that. I think it really gets into that material well, and it's just a great success. It was one of like Funimation's first English dubs after Dragon Ball, and despite how it's a dated dub, it really feels brand new. There's so much love and affection that has gone into the dub. It really stands the test of time. And it's just a beautiful time capsule of the 90s, but also a good example of how to do shonen anime right, how to do horror anime right. And this is a great way to consume it. These two sets, you get the seasons 1 and 2 together, you get seasons 3 and 4 together, and if you've never seen the show before, this is a great way to kind of maximize your content. If you have, this is a more effective way to check out the series than just buying each season piecemeal. You get a good chunk of it, and you can really enjoy what Yu Yu Hakusho has to offer.
Where are you gonna take us?
To the spirit world.
To the what?
The spirit world. We're going to see someone who will explain the ordeal to you and give you what you need.
What? What do I need?
And the final title we want to highlight for Release the Hellhounds is Ninja Scroll, the Blu-ray Collector's Edition Steelbook. Ninja Scroll might not be the first series you think of when it comes to horror anime. It certainly indulges in ninja and samurai archetypes. It's directed by Yoshiaka Kawajiri, who we mentioned with Wicked City and Demon City's Shinjuku. But what this movie does so well is that it takes those action tropes and then subverts them with villains who are demons. There are some truly terrifying monsters in this anime. There's like a rock monster who's so effective, some really vicious deaths. And I think Ninja Scroll is a great example of how you can take an action series and heighten it through the use of horror elements, through the use of monsters. This movie really opened doors in that sense. It's one of the more popular anime movies to come out of the 90s. It really set people up to better appreciate like mature anime. There was plenty of mature anime before Ninja Scroll, but it showed people that anime really is a medium that works for adults. It just had its 31st anniversary. It was back in theaters. If you got a chance to see Ninja Scroll in theaters, that's amazing. It looks so good on a big screen. And although it does kind of suffer from some dated issues of the 90s, the animation isn't one of those details. It still looks incredible. It still connects. It has some of the best action you'll ever see, and just some really effective monsters. And this Blu-ray Collector's Edition Steelbook set is one of the best ways to check out Ninja Scroll, whether you're a longtime fan of it or just curious about it and it's been on your checklist and you've never had the chance to watch it yet. So once again, for Release the Hellhounds, we have Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead Season 1, we have Yu Yu Hakusho Seasons 1 and 2, Seasons 3 and 4 sets, and Ninja Scroll Blu-ray Collector's Edition Steelbook. Before we go, fellow Otaku, we have time for one final segment. Yes, it is time for the Big Three. Let's do it. Okay, Big Three is our big opportunity where we highlight certain anime that might not be on your radar. There is so much anime out there, it's impossible to stay on top of it all. So this is our way of just highlighting some series that are worth your time. And in this edition of Big Three, we're focusing exclusively on horror content to kind of keep the Spooktacular train running. So the first title I want to highlight is Lily Cat. Lily Cat is a pretty obscure title. It's like a 45-minute OVA movie that just kind of slipped through the cracks, I think. It's kind of the perfect hybrid between Alien and The Thing. It focuses on like a team of astronauts in space who are doing their work on their maintenance ship. They suddenly kind of take on an alien entity unbeknownst to them, and it starts shape-shifting and taking them out one by one. So it has that isolated nature of Alien, but then you also have an alien that shape-shifts, like The Thing. It really is the best of both worlds in that sense. Gorgeous animation, it looks incredible, it really has some like aggressive body horror that's the best of its kind. It has some really upsetting material involving cats. If you like cats, don't watch Lily Cat. If you don't like cats, do watch Lily Cat. You're gonna have some glee in seeing these cats get destroyed. It's such a fun title though. Whenever I do like my Alien series rewatch, I put Lily Cat in there because it does kind of feel like an unofficial spin-off of the Alien franchise. With Alien Romulus out right now, it's a great double feature. Watch Alien Romulus, then watch Lily Cat, and just be like, this is incredible. Why don't we have more Alien anime out there? Lily Cat is the answer. Lily Cat, it's so cool.
Lily?
Paranoia Agent. Paranoia Agent comes from Satoshi Kon, who basically has a perfect filmography. He did Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, Tokyo Godfathers, Paprika, and he's been involved with like a few TV shows, but Paranoia Agent is like the one show that he masterminded. It's like really his series. And honestly, I think it's on par with Perfect Blue. It is such a gripping story, but it really uses the medium of episodic television to its success. It's only 13 episodes, so it's not like an overly long commitment. Basically, it follows a serial assailant known as Shonen Bat, who's like been hitting people with a bat, and each episode looks at a different one of his victims. However, all of them kind of talk about Shonen Bat in a different way, and in doing so, it really is a stunning deconstruction of perspective, memory, mob mentality, the idea that like a character like Shonen Bat maybe doesn't have power until we talk about him, until we give him life and celebrate something like that. It's kind of like the Tulpa philosophy that like a creature only comes into existence when we acknowledge it and give it that power. Each episode of Paranoia Agent is such an interesting piece of a greater whole, though. Like, it really breaks down the idea of a social phenomena and how different perspectives inform that in unique ways. Like I said, it's only 13 episodes, so it's not a super long show, but it's easy to get lost in this and just binge the whole thing. It is just a really gripping psychological horror that really shows off what Satoshi Kon can do. It's a great emotional, scary, frightening experience. It's one of my favorite anime, and I always rewatch it during the Halloween season. It's so cool. If you like Satoshi Kon's other work, this is a must-watch. If you just want to see something different and polarizingly upsetting, then Paranoia Agent definitely needs to be on your radar.
Huh?
The last title for the big three is Madoka Magica. Madoka Magica is a really interesting horror series in the sense that it dresses itself up as a magical girl show, but it kind of presents magical girl powers as like a death contract. It's a show where it's really teasing the audience the entire time, where its main character, Madoka, they want her to become a magical girl. It's teasing this idea of her becoming a magical girl through the entire series and really creates dread over that. You don't want to see her do that because you know, like, the happy mascot that's tantalizing her with this is wicked at the end of the day. And Madoka Magica really has incredible monsters that have to be fought, but all of them are sort of manifestations of the girl's inner trauma, kind of like what we talked about with Wonder Egg Priority. But it's a really upsetting, nihilistic show. If you like magical girl series, this is one of the best subversions of it. If you don't like magical girl series, this is a good entry point to it. It plays with all these tropes, but in a really haunting way. It gets into like this really hopeless narrative where you feel like it's impossible for these characters to win and that they're caught in this rigged system. It's just really different and exciting. It's done by Shaft, so it has gorgeous visuals at the end of the day. There's still one final Madoka Magica movie coming out that's set to wrap up this whole series, so this is the perfect time to kind of jump into it and see what's going on before the final movie comes out. But even if you're not checking out the movies and all this extra universe stuff, it tells a story that reaches a natural conclusion and is really powerful. It's one of my favorite horror anime, and again, it just plays with anime tropes in such a exciting way, in a story that feels like it could only be done in anime. Like, I can't imagine something like this being done in live action through like superhero tropes or something like that. It lives and breathes on anime, and that's really exciting. So once again, for Big Three Spooktaku edition, we have Lily Cat, we have Paranoia Agent, and we have Madoka Magica.
Would that be worth trading your soul for? Would you like to?
Yes, for Sayaka I would. I'll do it. I want to be a magical...
Unfortunately, fellow otaku, that's all the time we have in this episode before I get isekai'd back to the afterlife. It was really fun just having some fun, talking horror with you guys. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled program next time, but you know, you gotta celebrate the spookiness every once in so often. So we'll see you later, Space Cowboys. Stay safe, stay spooky. Feeling good about that one. All right, let's take it. Oh my God.